In the dim flicker of oil lamps stands the 16-year-old boy, dressed in a fine robe, with makeup on his face and a crown on his head. Before him is an altar, and beside him is an old Buddhist monk, his master. The boy lets out a quiet breath that he didn't know he was holding, because the ritual has been going well. He had memorized all his lines and chanted his scriptures perfectly, but still he chews on his inner lip, anticipating what comes next. His master shows him a scroll with the names of all the monks before who had gone through this ritual with their apprentices. The boy starts sweating. It must be the heat from the lamps. Finally, he steels himself and does what is expected of him. He starts undoing his pants. Medieval Japanese Buddhist temples were not only places of worship, but also places of education for those with enough clout. If you were from a family with any kind of name in the world, you would have sent your son to study at a temple. Temples had different classes of students. The ones called Chigo are what we'll talk about today. They were not the highest ranking boys, but were still from families that ate sushi with gold foil. Their fathers were ministers in the government, temple administrators, or those who served retired emperors. They were usually at the age of adolescence, from 12 to way too old for these monks. But they could get even older. These children were more disciples than normal students. Each child was assigned a priest, his master. Day in, day out, the boy waited on his master, pouring tea, serving meals, serving himself sometimes. An acolyte had to obey his master in all things, even in the bedroom. Historians compare it to a relationship between a vassal and a lord, or a child and Woody Allen. They took part in religious ceremonies and public rituals. Ceremonies could get big and elaborate, and Chigo made for nice decorations. In art and literature, they're often shown as beautiful and charming. It can be hard to tell in a painting whether someone is a Chigo or a woman. I guess that's not saying much. Sometimes it's hard to tell in a Japanese painting whether someone is a baby or a short, ugly old man. Now today, when you hear someone say age is just a number, you back away and call the FBI. But back then, people would respond with a nod, like you just said the sky was blue, and go back to hitting on their nieces. A 12-year-old Chigo was seen as a child, but a 24-year-old Chigo was also seen as a child. Your childness was not determined by age, but mainly by social status and the way you looked. Chigo had perks that regular monks did not. A monk's head was as bare as a bachelor's house, but Chigo could wear their hair long or tie them in loops, the hairstyle of children. They could dress in colorful clothing and even powder their faces. Normally, a Chigo only studied at the monastery until they became an adult, usually around 15 to 17 years of age. But then, where did the Chigo in their 20s come from? Well, instead of becoming an adult and leaving, a Chigo could choose to remain as one, staying at the temple for life. In one text, a monk complains about his acolytes goofing off, acting immature. He mentions that if they were 12 or 15, he would just find a playground and let it slide because they were young. But his acolytes are much older and should know better. He calls them by the word otona, a word you use for a mature man. But later in the same text, he calls the same disciples kodomo, which means children. It seems people did recognize that older acolytes were different from younger ones, but still put them all in the category of children. In a temple, the borders of childhood were like a woman's crotch in a Japanese adult video, blurry and often under the gaze of a creepy old man. A child could have been 15 or 35, so times have really changed not at all. Temples expected much from these students. The Chigo's job description was clear: to study and become a civilized person. Parents didn't send their kids off to faraway monasteries for them to goof off and sleep around. That's for university. Prayers and lessons smacked these students on the face at the crack of dawn, and canes smacked them on the butts when they misbehaved. Monks taught students to be well-mannered, hardworking, and obedient, using a lot of animals in their teachings for some reason. People who talk too much are like an old dog that barks at friends. They accomplish little. Lazy people who eat too fast are like a tired monkey obsessed with fruit. Brave people are like a gnat that enters the flame. The boring don't get in trouble. The priests hated chit-chat. Acolytes were to zip it unless spoken to. Sometimes you needed to talk, like when running an errand, but you had to leave right after the task was done. No dawdling about getting into absurd things like conversation. Still, they did encourage making friends with other students, so I guess you had to talk sometimes. Some of the rules sound curiously familiar to me, like don't walk around with toothpicks in your mouth and pick up your feet when walking. They said well-mannered children would benefit all sentient beings and were an offering of Buddhist compassion to the world. Monks taught that the temple was above everything in this world. One text says that a child is created from two fluids, semen from dad and menstrual blood from mom. They mix to create the child's bone and meat, because semen is white, like bone, and menstrual blood is red, like meat. This means your body is also the body of your parents. You should be loyal and respectful to your parents, because it means being loyal and respectful to yourself. Your parents are the number one people in your life, and your master is number 0, right above them. Your master has divine authority. This master-acolyte relationship seemed to be even more important than being well-behaved. A master was so divine, his Chigo had to stay 7 feet away from him in public, and couldn't even step inside his shadow. I'm not sure exactly what would happen if the Chigo breached the 7-foot divine gap. The leading theory is that the Chigo would just explode in a puff of nonsense. The behavior of students had religious consequences so severe that they had to be beaten. A good student allowed both master and student to ascend to Buddhahood, shining in a light brighter than his master's head. A bad student caused both to fall into hell. Therefore, not only could monks beat their acolytes to force them to behave, it was their duty to do so. A delinquent kid could go to hell and take his master with him. I assume this wasn't literal. They probably didn't think you actually went to hell for misbehaving. It seems like monks sometimes use hell and enlightenment as figures of speech, like, don't be bad or you go to hell, or be good and you'll go to paradise. There's a legend about the first emperor of a unified China, Qin Shi Huang, and his secret male lover. The legend goes, long ago, the Buddha handed down a piece of advice to a Chinese king, King Mu. It was just one sentence, but a sentence from the Buddha is worth a whole library. So King Mu taught this line to his heir, kicking off a whole tradition, each ruler whispering it to the next. After centuries, it found the ear of Emperor Qin Shi Huang. Now the emperor had a soft spot, or hard one, for a young man in the palace named Jido, and they started sneaking around, meeting up for midnight milk tea sessions. The emperor tried to keep the affair hush-hush because it wasn't appropriate, but palace walls got ears and court officials got ambitions. The officials sentenced the boy to a one-way stroll into a forest full of beasts and empty of emperors. Before Jido left, the emperor gave him a priceless gift, the ancient words of the Buddha. This divine verse had passed through a scarce number of ears by the time of Emperor Qin Shi Huang. But, because I love you, I will pass them on to you. So grab some cotton swabs, clear your ear canal, and prepare it for penetration by some wisdom. With compassionate eyes, the Bodhisattva Kannon looks at all living beings, and gathers good merit, boundless like the sea. Now, I know exactly what this means, of course, but it's a good critical thinking practice, so I'll leave it to you to figure out. Jido walked into the woods, chanting the words the emperor had given him, but instead of being ripped apart by a tiger, he eventually turned into a Taoist immortal named Pengzhu and reached Buddhahood. Now, hearing about the good manners and work ethic of temple students, you might glance over at your own children and ponder where exactly you went wrong, especially if you're my parents. It's unbelievable that the monks got these kids to be so humble and respectful and hardworking. And it's actually true. It is unbelievable. You shouldn't believe it. The rules of the temple were many, and so were the number of children who broke them. It turns out kids have been obnoxious since the dawn of history. One text, called The Education of Acolytes, is basically this monk complaining about his students. When reading about laws and rules in history, a great question to keep in mind is, how many people actually followed them? Often, when you see similar laws enacted multiple times, it's probably because people kept breaking them. The monk complained that these students had zero respect or manners. They made fun of others, like insulting the way people dressed. They spoke loudly at inappropriate times, broke into laughter randomly. They ate with their mouths full, making disgusting chewing noises, probably intentionally. They stirred up drama and gossiped endlessly. Sometimes an acolyte would grab someone's sword right off his belt and cut things to test how sharp it was. Sons of samurai families could carry swords and had been known to charge into people's rooms sword drawn, making them shit their robes. They often didn't respond when spoken to. They gambled with board games while yelling the nastiest stuff and cheated at every opportunity. All that advice about working hard, they went in one ear and out the ass. These boys were terrible students, lazy and uninterested in their studies. The monk even says, they despise that which they learn. Acolytes slept like a sloth on weed and woke up late, but still managed to take naps in the afternoon. Much of their time was spent goofing off. They didn't clean their teeth with toothpicks and didn't cut their nails regularly. You know how kids and some adults sag their pants? It may seem like they're following a dumb modern trend that makes it look like they're eager for anal, but no, they're actually paying homage to the past because this style has been around for ages. It was actually worse back then. Acolytes liked to wear their pants sagging in the front. From time to time, the real troublemakers would really sag and let it all hang loose in the front, turning heads and turning stomachs. Chigo actually liked to follow Buddhist rules into an alley and beat it to death. Sometimes acolytes were invited to banquets outside the temple, and they would drink sake like it wasn't a sin. They were interested in the religious life, like they were interested in doing their paint or watching taxes dry. Now, the education of acolytes is a satire, so you can't take all of it literally. But there were other writings that mentioned troublesome students. Obnoxious kids were probably really common. Besides their temple duties, Chigo also had to participate in a ritual called Chigo Kanjo, a ceremony that ended in the master and Chigo sleeping together. Hold up, monks were supposed to be celibate, so how was this allowed? The ritual was a whole elaborate thing. I won't go into detail in this video here, but I can tell you what the ceremony was supposed to do. By the power of Buddhist magic, it transformed the Chigo's body into 3 divine beings: the Buddha Dainichi, the Bodhisattva Kannon, and the central god of Tendai Buddhism, Sano Gongen. All kinds of rituals were designed to make the body of the Chigo so sacred it could piss green tea. Sex was forbidden, but this ritual allowed for a kind of Buddhist sexuality. You couldn't have sex with another person, but with the sacred bodies of these holy beings, how could that be sinful, they thought. It brought both master and apprentice closer to enlightenment. Now, if you've been paying attention, this ritual, where a boy goes full Buddha mode, along with an affair between a man and his very young male lover, should ring some temple bells in your head. Yeah, it's the legend of Qin Shi Huang and Jido. Jido turns into a holy Buddha. It's so similar to the legend that the ritual was likely based on it. Now you might say, there must have been some other similar stories, right? How do we know the ritual was based on this one? Well, what if I told you that there's one part in the ritual where the master gives his apprentice those same divine words of the Buddha that Qin Shi Huang gave to Jido, and the apprentice was supposed to recite it 3 times? At first glance, this ceremony might seem like it was probably just an excuse for monks to release their sexual frustrations, but when you read more about it, you realize that it was totally just an excuse. No monk ever said, "Oh my Buddha, it's Wednesday, I gotta go do the little boy abuse ritual again." What a drag. It was a thirst ritual to normalize sex with their acolytes. They didn't do it like amateurs, though. All parts of the ritual tied back to Buddhism with solid strings of reasoning. It's like writing a PhD dissertation that could stand up to the questioning of a dissertation committee on why it's good to fuck your student. Temples were full of brilliant minds, all grappling with crippling sexual repression. How often did they perform this ritual? A monk named Sosho once wrote that he wished to resist his temptations and vowed to keep relations with only one boy. Before, he had slept with over 100 acolytes. Now, this monk might be at the extreme end of the pee-pee, but it seems like a monk could sleep with at least a few acolytes. It happened often. Even though sex was the main part of the ceremony, most of it involved doing non-sexual preparation and prayers. If you really want to know the details of the ceremony, I have a premium video about it on my Patreon. Link in the description. If it's not there, it should be there soon. Or you don't have to do that. You can watch another video on the Chigo and their relationships with their masters by clicking here. Today on Patreon, we actually have a Kami member. There can be only one. His name is Ray, and he is now the channel's current patron god. All bow to Ray Omikami. We also have some new regular patrons: Chris O'Keefe, Lori the Toaster, Minion, and Violet Wilmore. Thank you so much, you guys. Alright, I love you, and spread the knowledge.